Good afternoon, everybody. It's Lisa with Undermine Propaganda. It is July 21st, 2026, Tuesday afternoon. First, thank you so much to everybody that has engaged in any way with any of my videos, liked, shared, commented, and also for those subscribers. Here are the ones that I have the names for: PT0311, David Cordero, Susan Chapman, Hank Roos, Alina Knifened, Christine H., Jamal Bashir, Ew Yuck, Bali Biggs, Alejandro Herrera, Sagittarius Ahmed, Amin Asi. Thank you guys, and to everybody else that has, like I said, engaged and subscribed. And a lot of you guys, I do not have your names, but I cannot tell you how much I appreciate it. So thank you. All right, let's get into it. Today on Breaking Points, there was an interview between Krystal and Adam Smith, the congressman from Washington, who is also top Dem on the Armed Services Committee. He's basically a moderate Dem for all intents and purposes, but he's recently changed his position on Israel. He has approved weapons his whole career to Israel, throughout this genocide to Israel. And all of a sudden now he has shifted on that. He signed on to the Massey Amendment this past week that stops weapons shipments to Israel. And Krystal breaks down why asked him to break down why he has come to this change, what brought him here, and also talks to him about his, honestly, somewhat disdain for the DSA and the insurgence of new DSA candidates and what his issues with these candidates are. She does a fantastic job here. Unlike other interviewers in mainstream media or even other interviewers on the left, for the most part, she is one of the best. She does not allow him to obfuscate. She does not allow him to not answer the question. And she digs in to the reasons why. And then when he says something that's not true, she corrects him and calls that out. And it's just a fantastic, fantastic interview, again, by Krystal. Well done job. Let's go ahead and take a look at that here right now, because it's far more interesting than hearing me babble. So here we go. Okay, we'll start here, right here, where Krystal is asking him why he changed his position on sending weapons to Israel and signed on to the Massey Amendment that stops weapons shipments to Israel, and what brought him to this change in position.
It'll put some pressure on them.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of this, they're
sure, it will, but it may not result in that. So, yes.
But it may be worth a try. They're already very unpopular.
100%,
and yeah.
100%. Yes.
Let me ask you about your vote for the Thomas Massey Amendment, which would block aid to Israel. And this is another one where you had told one outlet that you were planning to vote against it, and then you changed your mind and decided to vote for it. You put on a statement saying that you wanted to send a message to Benjamin Netanyahu. I'd love for you, there's actually been a lot of pro-Israel folks who've been attacking you, saying you gave in to pressure tactics, etc. I'd love for you to explain your own words, how you came to this place, because I do think your vote and others are quite extraordinary, given where consensus within Washington has been on the relationship with Israel. You had even Nancy Pelosi voting for this amendment yourself, given your position and your track record. You're someone who's been supported by AIPAC. Just take us through
This is going to take a minute.
That's fine. Take your time.
Okay, because the real challenge here is what Israel has historically been. Okay, Israel was historically a democratic state in the middle of no democratic states. They were a very strong ally of the U.S. We partnered with them on a variety of things, counterterrorism being the biggest thing during the ISIS fight and elsewhere. So you've got that historical relationship. Mm-hmm. And then you've got the reality of what Israel is living in. And that is that they are the only, well, except for Ukraine, they're the only country in the world, they're the only country in the world that from the day they were founded, people have been trying to eliminate them. I mean, there's no other country in the world that, Yemen and Saudi Arabia fought, but the Houthis never said that Saudi Arabia didn't have a right to exist. Okay, very existence wasn't on the line. When Israel came into being, from that very moment, they have been attacked constantly. And it comes down to a fundamental question: does Israel have a right to exist? Now, I'll tell you, and this is absolutely the DSA position, is that they don't. Okay.
Well, let's pause on that. I want to get to the DSA, and I don't want to fight you on all of this, but I want you to get to your point. I got to get through
this. Yeah. I got to get through this.
Okay.
So if you have a situation where Israel is threatened on all sides, and I know it's like, well, no, I'm not saying they don't have a right to exist, just they have to let all the Palestinians back in, and then effectively the Jews no longer control Israel. Okay.
Well, I'm sorry, but don't you as an idea of equal rights for all ethnicities something that you, in theory, support as a Democrat?
Well, sure, but the practical result of this is, if you say there should be equal rights within Israel, but if Israel allows it, they cease to exist as a country.
No, they cease to exist as a Jewish ethno-state. That's very different from ceasing to exist as a country.
Oh, that's it too, right there. I mean, there's these arguments he's making right here that they've been attacked since their inception. Nakba, anybody Nakba? That they're the ones that have been attacked, when it's again the complete opposite. And he just walks right into it here, like, well, Palestinians should have the right to come back. Palestinians should have the right to come back to their land and their homes that were stolen. He's against that. He states it pretty bluntly here. And I mean, she calls him out right away. You're supposed to be a liberal Democrat, meaning liberal, meaning human rights, meaning equality. And he's arguing for the ethno state here. See, these are contradictions which cannot continue to exist. You're either going to be on one side or you're going to be on the other. You're going to be on the right of human rights and equality, or you're not. And you can't be on the side of an ethno-supremacist state that gives all rights to Israeli citizens and takes away or does not allow equal rights to Palestinians. That is not the true liberal position. It is not the humane position. If that's your position, that you believe that Israel should be an ethno-supremacist state, then that's your position. But you're trying to have it both ways here. And Krystal's doing a good job right away here of calling him out on that.
Hold on, stop.
Why is this
we got to drill
an
down.
issue for U.S. taxpayers?
We got to drill down on that. Okay. All right. They cease to exist as an ethno state. So basically, Jews would live in Palestine and be governed by the Palestinians, by the Arabs. Okay. And maybe that's just what has to happen in the minds of some people, but understand the consequences of it. Understand why Israel was created in the first place, so that the Jews would have some place to go, okay?
Right,
and to just blithely say, well, yeah, it'll go away and it'll be fine. So that's point one.
Well, first of all, you're mischaracterizing my position. But
what is your
second
position?
of all,
what is your position?
Second of all, you're ignoring that Israel was not created in a land with no people land.
No, I know it wasn't.
There were people there who were displaced.
Right, very few countries ever were.
Yeah. There was a dispute over land.
Yes.
And Israel today, which I think is what you were getting to, is an apartheid ethno-state that, and I don't think you use this language, but that is in the process of committing a genocide.
Yep.
So we can debate the Israel of the past and the various historical interpretations of how we got to this place. But I think you're correct when you say we have to deal with the reality of today. And, I would argue that it's not just the Netanyahu government. We can certainly argue that point. Yeah. But, we have Jake Sullivan, who just came out and said that he regrets the Biden policy of the bear hug. He thinks they should have done more to restrain Israel. And I'm wondering if you have any regrets, because now you're voting in a somewhat different way, both with the NDAA shift in position, with the Massey amendment saying, hey, we should blockade. I want to send a message to Netanyahu. At the peak of the Gaza onslaught, you had a complete siege. You had entire neighborhoods that were leveled. They created the largest population of child amputees. Do you have any regrets about your votes during that time period?
I don't, because everyone forgets about October 7th. Everyone forgets about...
Oh, she just said you have the largest population of child amputees. You've had complete destruction of the Gaza Strip. You have had starvation. You have had sexual assault. You have had complete decimation of Palestinian society, schools, hospitals, churches, homes, everything. That's what you've had. So do you regret your votes for supporting that? And he says no. That's all you need to know about this man. And the hubris and the arrogance is just seeping through all over that studio with this interview. That he thinks he's the smartest one in the room. He thinks Krystal is stupid. And it is just pouring out of him. And then he says no and goes after those facts. The highest place in the world where there are child amputees, the highest concentration of child amputees. Do you regret your vote to send the bombs that created that condition? No, he says, and pivots to October 7th. Almost 3 years into this genocide. The numbers are 70,000, which are such an undercount by every expert of the people that have been killed in Palestine. And this man is saying he does not regret. He's just now signing on to something that will stop these weapons being sent to Israel. And he says he does not regret his vote. I have a feeling that this is the type of individual that would never admit that they were wrong about anything. Because if you can't admit you're wrong about that.
What Hamas and Hezbollah and Iran have done, and their desire is to wipe out the state of Israel and all the Jews living there. Is that not, I mean, that's in Hamas's charter, and Hamas is still they're still doing that. I don't like the way Israel decided to defend themselves, but the solution being proposed is, and this is the consequence of what you're saying is, sorry, we had this idea back in 1948, we were going to give you a state, and that way you could protect yourself against all these attacks. Didn't work out, so go back to Europe, go wherever. This just isn't going to work anymore.
I think the question,
and I don't think you understand how difficult that is to just go, yeah, I guess that's fine. Because
I think the question, and this is not, this is my perspective, but I think this is also what the Democratic Party base in particular, and most of the country view at this point, is why should our tax dollars, given all the things in the world and all the things in our country,
that's why I voted for the Massey Amendment.
Spent in much more effective ways.
Exactly.
Why should that be going to prop up an ethno-state that is an apartheid state? And I wonder if you agree with that characterization, that has been committing, if you don't want to say genocide, certainly war crimes with that tax money.
But that's fine. Yeah. Look, no, that's why I voted for the Massey Amendment. I don't think we should be sending that money over there. But look, I have concerns about Hamas, about Hezbollah, that people don't seem to share. Let's say that this plays out the way you describe, and okay, there is no Jewish ethno-state, and the consequence of that is there is no Jewish state. Basically, you have the Palestinians, as they would now be governing that area, and that means Hamas would be governing that area. Do you have any problem with that? Do you have any problem with Hamas suddenly becoming a much more powerful entity and having the country, from the river to the sea, if you will now be a Hamas-run state on the Mediterranean? Are you okay with that?
He's ridiculous. He is. Are you okay with the ongoing genocide that Israel continues to commit in Gaza and now in southern Lebanon? And you are making up this straw man of a Hamas-led, because that's, those were the words that all these pundits used to discredit the number that were killed, to discredit sexual assaults, to discredit any information coming out of Gaza. Hamas-led, Hamas ministry, Hamas numbers, Hamas-run hospital. They were the government. So Hamas was part of all those things. It wasn't just the people that did the attacks on October 7th. But look at the look on his face. Like, he gotcha, Krystal. Are you okay with Hamas-led Israel? Is that what you're okay with? What do you think would happen if Hamas was leading Israel? Look at what's happening with Israel leading Israel. Look at what's happening with the Zionists leading Israel. We are now in a war with Iran. They are committing genocide in southern Lebanon. They are continuing to kill Palestinians with this ridiculous, non-existent facade of a ceasefire in Gaza. No, Adam Smith, you didn't get her. You think you're smarter than you are, Adam.
First of all, I'm not convinced that would be the reality.
Well, how would it not be the reality?
I don't know how you can get away from how illiberal it is to not support equal rights for people, regardless of if they're Jewish, Arab, Muslim, Christian,
totally
etc.
with you. Look,
and then the other piece is,
but Hamas doesn't support equal rights either.
But do you support a two-state solution? Is that your idea?
Look, yes.
So how do we get there? How do we get there?
But stop.
Hold on.
I can answer this.
How do we get there at a time?
No, hold on.
When you have settlements that have made it effectively impossible.
There's something I have to explain before all this makes sense.
In order to create a Palestinian state.
Look, let's go back to what you said. I support a two-state solution. I am also aware of the fact that it's probably no longer possible. You didn't let me get that part out.
Okay,
which is really kind of important to this whole conversation.
I would agree. Yeah.
And it's very disappointing. And there's a lot of blame to go around for why we got there. Yes, I would like to see a two-state solution. I am not naive, as you just described, to know that it's simply not on the table at this point. And that creates a massive, massive problem. But the idea, again, that the easy solution is, okay, we get rid of the Jewish ethno-state, and the details of how Israel is currently running, their country. There are Arabs in the parliament, but there are parts of it that aren't. Okay, so we get rid of that.
Okay.
So what's your idea for what replaces that? You say you're not convinced that it would be a Hamas-run thing.
Well, I've offered that. Listen, I really honestly think that this is something for Palestinians and Israelis to decide. I don't know why it is the American taxpayers' business to fund this.
Again, that's why I voted for the Massey Amendment.
But what is actually your idea? Because you're saying, you don't support a one-state solution. You don't support a two-state solution. There is no good solution. That's where you are. That is the reality of where we are now.
Right, and I'm,
no good solution.
And I'm open to ideas, but let's understand the history of this. There's a great book called Palestine 1936 that described what was going on there. So you were coming to the end of the British Mandate. And you had, the Jews had been coming in since the 19th century. They'd been there a long, long time ago. And they were looking for, a place to be. The Palestinians were looking to drive out the British. And the Palestinians and the Arabs reached a conclusion in the mid-1930s and said, okay, Jews, you can stay, but you're not going to run anything. Okay. Jews said, no, we can't stay. So they started a civil war. Okay. And they fought. And then, of course, 1948, they got the country created. Another war was started. A war, and I know people say, well, this is a war to drive the Palestinians out. It was also a war to eliminate Israel, to basically kill Israel in the crib in 1948. And they fought, and they fought, and they fought, and they fought. And at no point was there ever anything carved out for the Jews. And so the Jews have been fighting an existential fight. And
it's so hard for me to, because I know you consider yourself, I think, liberal. You would describe yourself that way, like in the classical liberal sense.
But there's no liberal option on the table here. That's what I'm telling you.
Why?
You keep saying
illiberal
Jews, we cannot have. Illiberal Palestinians are fine.
No, but why should?
And I voted for it. It shouldn't.
Why should?
I already answered that question.
Taxpayers?
It shouldn't.
Okay, so and is that your answer for this particular amendment, or will that continue to be your position moving forward?
That's where we're at.
So you're done with the U.S. funding Israel?
I think
working out themselves.
Yeah, I'm not 100%. I got to say. I mean, look, if tomorrow there's a peace agreement, okay, and they actually go forward with something where they create a reasonable alternative for the Palestinians in Gaza, if they actually stop what they're doing in the West Bank and get to peace in Lebanon, that may change. I don't see that happening, which is why I gave you the answer I gave. But again, this notion that somehow there's a liberal option on the table, and how could we possibly support the illiberal state of Israel? What's going to come in there? Okay, it's going to be liberal.
Well, now, he's setting up this dichotomy. Like, there's the only thing that is possible to support is the inhumane Zionist ethno-supremacist state. Like, there's nothing else that we can do. This is all that we can do is support the ethno-supremacist state. Like, there's no other options. There is no option to sanction, to stop arms embargo on Israel, because without us, the facts support that they could not continue doing what they're doing with bombing, slaughtering. But he's making the case that there is no other option other than to support the ethno-supremacist state. It's just not true. And it's just such an obvious untruth that there's no other option. I have to support the genocidal actions of this state because I don't have any other options. Because if the Palestinians are allowed to come back, then they'll definitely want to rule. They'll definitely be illiberal. They'll definitely want to destroy and subjugate the Jewish people, the Israelis. They want to subjugate the Israelis, the Zionists. So we can't do that. So rather than allowing people to come back to their homes in their land, we have to support the ethno-supremacist state. That is his position here. That is what he believes is the right thing to do. And it is, like Krystal says here, it's just hard to reconcile someone who's saying they're a liberal Democrat for equal rights and humanity holding such a horrific, ghoulish position. But he is.
With you on the taxpayer dollar.
You mentioned Rahm Emanuel's speech. You said you associate yourself. Yeah. If memory serves, he supports banking sanctions on Israel. You know, we sanctioned our at the time South Africa. You support that?
I am one of the original co-sponsors of the It's the West Bank Violence Prevention Act, which sanctions Israel for what they're doing in the West Bank. Yes, absolutely. It's wrong. It shouldn't be done. Yes, we should sanction them, and we should specifically sanction Smotrich and Ben-Gvir, who are advocating so much of this. Yes.
Okay. All right. Let's move on to some of these broader disagreements. And I guess a good transition into that is, how much do you think the question of the relationship with Israel-Palestine is serving as a litmus test in Democratic primaries? You know, from my perspective, it's been very important because it serves as a proxy for kind of a host of other issues and concerns that the Democratic base has with the Democratic Party at this point. But I'm curious your perspective on how important that has become and the reason why you think it has become an important issue.
It's becoming more important. It's not the most important issue. The most important issue, it's not even close to the most important issue in these primaries. The most important issue that is driving the anti-establishment feelings in the primaries is two things. Number one, the belief that we have not effectively fought Trump. Okay, when you look at what really drives these people, yes, Israel's part of it, but it's also going after, you were part of the establishment, how come you didn't beat Trump? Now I have a complaint here, and that is that a lot of the policies of the DSA and the left, open borders, defund the police, the idea that you can't possibly spend enough government money, identity politics, a lot of those things are what gave Trump his power. And part of the reason those of us in the establishment struggled to beat Donald Trump is we were having to defend policies like open borders, okay? And Trump walked right into that, all right? So the notion that it's just the establishment that led to Trump losing, I think, is a misplaced fact.
Can we pause there for 1 second? Go ahead, get to your critique.
And I certainly, but I also think that the establishment Democratic Party, I mean, the whole Joe Biden thing, nominating, even thinking about nominating Joe Biden in
because of his age?
Well, because he couldn't, I don't care how old he is, he just couldn't speak, okay? He couldn't communicate clearly.
Yeah.
Whether that was because he was old or because he couldn't communicate clearly, it had the same effect. And then the second big issue is income inequality. It is absolutely true that whoever has been governing for the last 20 or 30 years hasn't done enough to create opportunity for enough people.
Yeah.
Those two issues, I think, really drove the feeling of let's try something different. Now, the question is whether or not the DSA agenda of, is actually going to achieve either of those objectives. Is that what's going to help us defeat Trump and MAGA? Is that what is going to build a more broad-based economic thing? But this is where I am very sympathetic with the DSA. I'm an economic populist. All right, I think we should rewrite the tax code to actually tax rich people. I've been working with a woman, Ray Madoff. She's a professor up at Boston College, who wrote a book about how we built our tax code so that investors don't ever pay taxes. Let's change that. Okay, I'm very pro-union. Stock buybacks. Why do we have stock buybacks? They didn't exist prior to 1982.
Yep.
So obviously corporations can exist without them. On that agenda, I'm there. Part of the problem I have with the broader agenda is you can't have free stuff for everybody all the time, and another message that the left gave.
And that's so annoying. Like, I agree with him on the stock buybacks. I agree with him on the taxation issues, but that's not all that's causing these problems. A living wage. We have not had an increase in minimum wage since 2009. Since 2009. Medicare for all, universal health care, Medicare for all. See, we want our taxes that we pay out of our hard-earned money to go to things that help us as a society, not to bombs, to bomb other countries, to kill people abroad, to give Elon Musk subsidies to make him even richer when he's nearly a trillionaire. We want money to go to things like Medicare for all, free higher education, and a higher living wage. I mean, these things, just those things alone, just universal health care alone would help so many people, and it would help what he is talking about here that he supports, which is inequality is so bad. But he doesn't support Medicare for all. He doesn't support Medicare for all.
Us in the last 10 years was that deficits and debts don't matter. Are you familiar with modern monetary theory?
Of course.
Yeah. It's absurd. The idea that we just spend as much money as possible is not a problem. Now, I want to tax people. I want a better social welfare state. But to argue that we can have a better social welfare state because the debt doesn't matter undermines the credibility of that argument.
I think with the decline of the U.S. dollar and potential risking of the U.S. dollar as a reserve currency, it's something we have to think more about now. But here's
so let me drill, the understatement of the morning, by the way.
Let me drill down a little bit on a few things you've said. So you've argued both from most of your argument against the DSA thus far, I think you could characterize as an electability argument. You think
No. It's bad policy.
Okay, so
I don't think having unlimited immigration is sustainable. I don't think getting rid of the criminal justice system is a smart way to govern. It's not just electability.
So here's a question I have for you. So back in 2018, you worked together with Pramila Jayapal on a bill to abolish ICE, which is a key demand.
I worked with her, and here's what the bill did. Okay,
well,
it's a slogan.
We have an article here from the Seattle Times, your local paper. U.S. Reps Pramila Jayapal and Adam Smith aim to abolish ICE, restructure immigration enforcement.
Exactly.
You were one of the Democrats actually who was in office when you voted for
Can I tell you what this actually does? So we can have an intelligent conversation.
Well, number one, do you still support this?
Let me tell you what it does.
Okay, but do you still support
that doesn't help anything, because what is it? Can I?
Yeah, of course. But first, do you still support it? And you can explain more in detail what it is.
Let me tell you what it is. Okay.
Yes.
When we created the Department of Homeland Security, we took immigration enforcement away from the Justice Department and we put it into DHS and created ICE.
Correct.
What this does is it puts immigration enforcement back at the Justice Department.
And gets rid of ICE.
Right. Well, but
that's my position too. But we're on the same page here.
Yes, but it doesn't get rid of immigration enforcement.
Okay. So let me hold you to account again.
Yeah.
Tell me which candidates, specifically, not a policy paper that there theoretically says, which candidates have said we should get rid of all immigration enforcement?
I forget the name, the woman who beat Andrew Espelot. Absolutely.
Darlisa Chevalier.
Yeah.
So you have one candidate who said that. Do you think that that her views should be associated with everyone under the DSA label, or do you think that each person should be evaluated individually?
Many conversations with many immigration advocates, and I always ask them, and look, I'm in favor of a robust immigration system. I think what immigration enforcement is doing right now is an absolute crime, okay? And it should be, and I think we should go back to the Justice Department. That's what I said.
And you still support the bill?
Absolutely.
So you support abolishing ICE?
But abolishing ICE is just a rhetorical...
Yes, you don't like the label, but you support it, right?
But the problem is it means different things to different people, okay? If you're talking about, let's go back to a Justice Department enforcement mechanism, that's fine. But there are a lot more people who support eliminating enforcement. And let me tell you the question I always...
He is freaking out. It's like he's trying to switch positions that he has held his entire life. And he's trying to be appealing to now the shift that we're seeing across the Democratic Party base, including liberals now that are supporting things like universal health care, like abolishing ICE, like stopping funding to Israel to stop the horrific actions that they're doing in the Middle East and continue to do with the genocide. He is like trying to move with the winds, with the way the Democratic base is moving to keep his power, but also doesn't want it framed in a certain way. And the way Krystal pulls up that article, like she knew that he was going to try to skirt away from this and call out DSA for having a policy position of abolishing ICE, that she knew he was going to do that and had that ready to go, was just As they say, the chef's kiss. It was perfect, and he is freaking out.
Let me tell you.
Giving me one.
Let me tell you the question I always ask and the answer I always get from dozens of different immigration advocacy groups. I said, look, in order for this to work, you have to be able to tell me who would you deport and who wouldn't you let into the country. And they literally never answer that.
Okay, are they in Congress?
They are advocacy groups.
Here's my other question for you is, you want to take the most extreme positions that you can find in the DSA platform, or that
let me
finish my question, please. That one candidate, Daria-Lisa Chevalier, who I agree has positions that I think can legitimately be characterized as radical, right? You want to take those positions and you want to tar an entire group of candidates with them.
Well, let me ask you this.
Aren't you effectively doing the work of the Republicans there?
Yes,
by saying all these people, they're all so crazy. They don't want any enforcement, they don't want any police, they don't want any borders,
let me consolidate for you. Do you think, all right, you've done your thing, let me do my thing.
They could easily characterize your abolish ICE position as just as crazy and radical as Daria-Lisa.
But I can't, because the Justice Department's going to enforce. Let me ask you this. Joe Biden, his policy, okay, so not just one person in a platform, whatever. Do you think his policy was too lax in terms of border security?
I don't, but I acknowledge that politically, that helped fuel the rise of the return of Donald Trump. So let me say, but hold on a second. Which wing of the Democratic Party does Joe Biden come from? He doesn't come from the DSA left, does he?
Exactly. He comes. Okay, Adam thinks he's got her. Adam thinks he's got her there. He's got another got you. Wrong, Adam. You're mismatched. You're mismatched because she is calling out truth, she is calling out facts, and she is confident in those positions. You are obfuscating. You are trying to change your positions with the winds to keep your power, and you are failing. You are failing here to get a gotcha because you didn't again.
From the establishment, and so to go back to one of the original.
Wherever he comes from, how did he govern?
Well, he funded the genocide, so he covered in a lot of right-wing ways, but. To go back to your original point about electability, right. I think it's very hard.
I never made a point about electability.
You said that you thought that these positions, if you listen to your original answer, you said you thought these positions with the DSA were part of what brought back Donald Trump.
Fair enough. Yes, but there's also policy concerns.
Okay, but on the electability point, how can you argue that your camp within the Democratic Party has a lot of credence when it comes to electability when
I argued the exact opposite. I'm with you.
When Hillary Clinton loses to Trump, Biden wins by adopting some left-wing views, then loses to Trump. It was the establishment that propped him up, that forced war and sort of a primary. So how could it be the fault of the left that we're losing?
There's three things. Okay. I always say that the fall of the Democratic Party is a tragedy in three acts.
Okay.
Number one, we didn't do enough on the economic issues. And I think that Obama and Clinton get way too much of the blame for that. I think they really tried to get after broader economic issues, certainly the Affordable Care Act, a whole lot of other provisions that were put in there, but we didn't do enough on economic inequality.
Wrong. Obama and Clinton don't get enough pushback for what they did not accomplish and how they brought us to this point. Obama bailed out the banks and allowed millions of innocent American citizens to lose their homes, and they got nothing. The criminal bankers got bailed out. They got golden parachutes, no criminal charges. That's what Obama did, and that was one of many, but one of the big reasons that brought us to where we're at now. So yeah, no, you're wrong.
Number two, the left came along and took some positions that weakened us. I'm not blaming one group. Everyone's like, well, you're blaming us. What about them? It's like, there can be collective responsibility here, okay? It's not an either-or choice. Yes, we didn't do enough in economics. And then some of the positions of the left, and there were a lot of people running around. And when people say abolish ICE, do they mean abolish enforcement or do they mean change enforcement? Okay, and that's where you get into that difficult issue. We've had criminal justice problems, The defund the police movement did not help us in any way. And it was a thing. And I'm no, we never did that, okay? And then three.
You did nothing. That's another thing. It's this defund the police. You were saying defund the police, and that's what caused Democrats to lose. That's a bunch of crap. You know what caused you guys to lose? You didn't make any police reform after the biggest protest in American history. After George Floyd was killed, you promised to make changes in the criminal justice system. Did you do any of it? No, you didn't do anything. The problem is you said you would do things that were populist, economic populism. You said you would do things to rein in police brutality. You said you would stop at the wars. You said you would eliminate student debt. You said you would raise the minimum wage. All left DSA positions. You didn't do any of those things. Instead, Joe Biden enabled and supported a genocide and didn't do any of the other things he said that he would do on economic populism. That's why you guys keep losing, and that's why you lost. Again, these things that people try to blame, these positions people take and say these are the reasons why the Democratic Party is losing, pardon me. I need to slow down. The Democratic Party is losing isn't because they're not moderate enough. It's because they're too right-wing. The Democratic base supports Medicare for all, raising the minimum wage, ending the wars, police reform, abolish ICE. The majority of the Democratic base supports those things. So no, Mr. Adam Smith, this argument of they're too left-wing, radical left is not true. The Democratic Party is a sellout, corporate-owned, warmongering party. That's why they are losing. That's why they are nearly as unpopular as the Republicans and Trump at this point. Still, even with everything that Republicans have done. That tells you a lot.
Joe Biden.
Yeah.
Those three things are what led to us. And every time, and I want to bring them all in, but people say, well, if you blame the left, you're just being a Republican. Well, can't we learn as we go?
Well, my problem is not with your, look, I have my own critiques of the left, right? I think that I actually think the identity politics thing came out of the Hillary Clinton campaign and was a way for the establishment to beat back the rise of the Bernie Sanders left. No doubt the left embraced it. I have been a critic of quote unquote woke, although I hate the word at this point, identity politics. That's my, my position. I'm a class first leftist. So I have my own critiques here. I'm not saying you can't. I'm saying when you caricature an entire wing of the party at this point.
Aren't you caricaturing the entire wing of the centrists and saying that we're like,
no, because I'm not trying to say you have the same views as John Fetterman. I don't think that you do, or Josh Gottheimer for that matter.
And I'm not saying they all have the same views.
You are trying to take the views of, let's say, Darian Lisa and the DSA platform and saying this is what the entire DSA coalition stands for.
I'm just saying it's an issue and it's a challenge.
Let me get you to, so I think the most prominent example of socialist governance in the US right now is Zoran Mamdani in New York City. He got asked a question that's very relevant to this conversation about, what about people who are concerned about socialism or concerned about democratic socialism? Let me get you to respond to what he had to say. This is E2.
For all of the fear-mongering around democratic socialism, the best response is to show what it actually means. And what we've shown over the last 6 months is exactly that. We've shown that a city with a democratic socialist vision is one that paves more than 170,000 potholes, 50,000 more than the prior administration by this point. It's a city that has delivered the lowest recorded number of shootings and shooting victims and murders in New York City's history. It is a city that is on a pathway to universal childcare, saving thousands of parents more than $20,000 a year. And it's a city that is doing all of these things while fighting for the people who are often left behind, workers who we've secured more than $10 million for, tenants more than $64 million. These are all indicators of what is so scary to a right wing that has built its entire power and framework on the idea of debating who should be left behind.
So is Zoran's version of socialism a version that you could get on board with, since he's really focused on the affordability pieces that you
I'm encouraged by what he's doing. And I think that form of trying to get things done, that's the other problem, is so much of the left, and certainly we experienced this in Seattle, became an academic exercise. They were spending all day long talking about, the history of racism, as opposed to going out in the community and saying, these are people who've been discriminated against. Let's get them access to capital so they can start businesses. Let's get them access to capital so they can get homes. Let's do a job, let's do workforce development so they can get jobs. It became an academic exercise about the history of the U.S. and about, are we, just an irreversibly bigoted racist. And that's all interesting. What are we doing to govern effectively? And actually, everything that Mamdani said right there, I'm encouraged. If you govern and focus on getting things done, so-called sewer socialism from back in the day, when you had mayors who were socialists because they're going to go out and work, that's great. As an academic exercise, when you want to explain to me the history of oppression, when you say things to me like, well, that person can make that argument because of the power dynamic, and we operate in this weird intellectual world that's got nothing to do with practical problem solving and logic, okay, that's where I have a problem. Michelle Wu up in Boston also, on the left, governing really well. There are other folks who haven't governed so well because they got trapped in this sort of ideological thing where the whole focus was on oppressed and oppression as opposed to actually governing well. So yes, I am encouraged by what I've seen in the last, 6-7 months in Mamdani's term. I'm a working class, blue collar kid. I'm in favor of economic populism. And if socialism can work on that level. Now, I think you also have to recognize that private industry has to be part of it. Okay. We have to have businesses that grow. But yeah, I had someone, I was up in New York a month or so ago, and someone said, the problem is we took the guardrails off capitalism.
No, we don't have to have private businesses when it comes to certain things. Just should not be for profit. Healthcare, there should be no private business profit motive in it whatsoever. That's why we have the most expensive healthcare in the entire world with some of the worst outcomes. That's the result of private businesses being involved in something like healthcare. Healthcare, housing, food, childcare, college, all of those things. And I'm a socialist. But if you want to make changes within this messed up system, the minimum you should do is to remove profit from all those types of things. We don't have to have we have to. That's the old way of thinking. There's never anything, and there isn't anything that exists anywhere in the world ever except capitalism. Capitalism is the only way. It's this old boomer thinking, this old elite thinking. And this is what this man still supports. And no, we don't, not only do we not need, it is destroying us to have private businesses involved in things like healthcare and college and childcare and housing and food. Look at where we're at. I mean, just look at where we're at here in America with those things in this hyper-capitalist system where everything and everyone is commodified.
Over the course of the last 50 years, that's what we did. We took the guardrails off capitalism. So let's put those guardrails back on. And if you want to call it socialism, whatever you want to call it, I don't care. But let's govern more effectively.
So let me ask you then, Josh Gottheimer said, if you're a socialist, you're not a Democrat. It sounds like you don't agree with that.
No, I mean, but again, the problem with this is the whole abolish ICE thing. You throw a term out that means 15 different things to 15 different people, and you're like, you support this. It's like, well, which one of the 15 versions are you talking
I'm
about?
not asking you to support it, but he and others have said basically.
Sorry, he's so hurt about that article she brought up about him abolishing ICE. He keeps going back to it.
We don't want these people in the party. We don't want to share the tent with them. And it doesn't sound like you're in that place.
I am not. Now, I think we ought to be able to have a conversation about the issues. I was sick to death, and you did it to me again, when I was trying to say, hey, look, on immigration, we need to show that we are in favor of enforcement. Well, you're just giving me Republican talking points.
I didn't say that.
Yeah.
No.
You said something about me like sounding like Republican.
No. What I said
why can't we have a conversation about it?
What I said is that when you take the most radical position of one person or from a policy platform and you paint with a broad brush, you're handing Republicans a talking point. Oh, this is what these people are. And what I'm saying is that you could easily be put into that camp, given some of your positions that you continue to hold. For example, whether you want to call it dismantling ICE or reorganizing ICE under different agencies or whatever you want to call it. You just start getting rid of ICE.
It's not actually a joke. It's how are you going to enforce it? What sort of enforcement are you going to do? And if going back to the Justice Department makes sense to me.
Oh my God, he's like the principal. It's not a joke, Krystal.
And ICE would no longer exist, but you'd still have immigration enforcement. But this is the biggest.
Could you actually? I'm curious your view, because the counter to that would be, well, if you're just going to do enforcement, why not just keep ICE and reform ICE? Right? There's some group of people would say, oh, it's too radical to get rid of ICE. We need to just reform it, vet better, etc. Why do you think that it needs to be taken apart? Because obviously I agree with you.
What Trump has done with it, I think just puts it in a category. And I don't know, theoretically within the Department of Homeland Security, I suppose you could have immigration enforcement that made sense. But I think at this point we need a clean break. And look, the biggest thing that I want in all this is the ability to have a conversation. All right. And this is my biggest problem with the left. I have been unable to hold a town hall meeting for a year because a bunch of leftists show up and scream at me and don't let anyone else speak. We had a hearing in the University of Washington on whether or not to divest from Israel. After all the protests, we're going to have a hearing. So the first 3 people got up and testified in favor of divesting. 4th person got up and testified against divesting. 2 sentences in, shouted down, screamed at, wouldn't stop. The meeting, you talk about illiberal. Okay, having people stand out in front of my house, screaming death threats at me and threatening my wife. Okay, and the left, oh well, of course we don't support. We're peace activists. We would never do something like that. Okay, how about you just say no? They did it. It's wrong. We're against it. We are going to be liberal. We're going to stand up for stuff. I think that whole thing has created a major problem as well. And that's what I try to have these conversations. And people, well, you're just a Trump supporter. We have to be able to have an intellectual discussion. I guess positive thing. I think Mamdani has done that. Yeah. I don't agree with everything he's doing, but he's having legitimate, thoughtful conversations instead of screaming matches over who can threaten the loudest.
Let me just, last question, because I know you have a briefing that you need to get to. As a result of your vote on the Massey Amendment, which would block aid to Israel, AIPAC said, basically, we're done with this guy, pulled your name off their fundraising website. You're a person who, you are in a very important position for them. Right?
Okay. Well, that's pretty much, there's only a couple more minutes there. And the first 10 minutes, I did not play either, just for the sake of allowing anybody that wants to watch the entire interview, which is actually on YouTube, free to watch. Highly recommend watching the whole interview. Very, very insightful. But these are the types of interviews that should be happening all the time. And thank goodness for people on the left that are actually talented enough, intelligent enough, read well enough to understand the issues, to be able to, and courageous enough to conduct an interview like this that actually pulls out where people's positions really are, does not allow them to obfuscate, forces them to answer questions that they should have been answering their entire career because they are politicians. They work for us. They always have. But, well, I should say they should work for us, but they never have. But she forces the conversation here into a place that makes him answer questions that he would never have to answer on mainstream media. Never. So good job, Krystal. Greatly appreciate in any interview that does this. Jeremy Scahill did a wonderful one last week that really held Ro Khanna's feet to the fire. These are the kind of conversations that need to be had. We need to push these people. We are in dangerous times, both domestically and in foreign entanglements in the Middle East and all over the world right now, that the time for these games of obfuscation and not answering questions, and like I've said before, these just managing around the edges and these teeny tiny little reforms, when we have moved so far across the Rubicon at this point, major changes need to happen yesterday. So again, thank you, Krystal, for that interview. Greatly appreciate it. It was a highlight in my Tuesday afternoon. And I want to thank everybody and anybody that has watched this video or engaged in any way. Please subscribe. It is free. Let me know what you think, what other questions maybe Krystal should have asked, if she should have pushed back on some other things. What you think of Adam Smith? Do you think he is in any way genuine? I do not. But I am open and willing to hear and engage in any questions, comments, concerns that anybody has. All right, guys, I appreciate you. Please try to find, at least I hope you try to find some peace in the rest of your day in these crazy times. I will talk to you soon. Bye.